We're in a new year, 2026. And somehow, despite me having constant health issues this year, which caused me to scale back my video output, I still managed to see 54 new releases, which is about average for me, so I'm a little bit more impressed on that. So, here's all 54 2025 movies that I saw, from worst to best. Without a doubt, easily coming in last place is War of the Worlds. Nothing even comes close. How do you manage to screw up War of the Worlds? By making the whole thing a Zoom call, barely showing any of the action, have it star Ice Cube, and then make the plot about government conspiracies. Also, making an ad for Amazon Prime. Doing War of the Worlds as found footage could theoretically work, but the execution here is awful, and barely has anything to do with War of the Worlds. It's an incredibly stupid movie, with even stupider execution, and I don't know why this was greenlit. It's not even so bad you can make fun of it. It's just boring. And I'd rather have a movie that's fun to make fun of than a movie that's boring. Number 53, Alexander and the incredibly long movie title that I don't have time to say. Let's make a sequel to a movie that came out 10 years ago, that was critically and commercially panned, and when we do the sequel, we'll write it without any actual source material, since the first movie was based on a book that doesn't have a sequel, and we'll replace the whole cast. We'll also make it super niche, by having every joke be something only Mexicans would understand, because the audience of Mexicans who also liked the first movie is so big. Now, you can do a movie with Mexican culture and have it do very well and be accessible to everybody. Movies like Coco and Flamin' Hot are great examples of that, but this one seems very narrow in the audience, which is weird, because you'd think Disney would want as broad an audience as possible. And doing a sequel to replace the original cast is such a great strategy. It never goes wrong. Greenlighting projects like this is why Disney is losing money and subscribers and why their stock is dropping. Not to mention, this movie is one of my least favorite genres, the road trip genre. Now, there are a couple of those that I think work, such as The Addams Family 2 from 2021 and A Goofy Movie, but the majority of them, such as Onward, Alvin and the Chipmunks The Road Trip, and Diary of a Kid Long Haul, are all pretty bad. There's only so many jokes you can do with that genre, and they've all been done. Leaving one of the family members at a gas station, for example. That's done in every road trip movie ever. Stop it. On top of that, the plot is all over the place. It's basically two different movies. On one hand, it's a road trip movie, but then it's also trying to be an Indiana Jones type story with a cursed idol, and I don't know, it was just odd. I don't know. Maybe there's an audience for this, but it wasn't for me. For me, the jokes were either jokes I didn't get because I'm not Mexican, or they were jokes that have been done in 10,000 other road trip movies. For me, this is a movie I'd recommend skipping. Number 52, Smurfs. The first 10 minutes have one or two mildly amusing jokes, and casting John Goodman as Papa Smurf is a pretty great choice. Other than that, the film does not work. It's the cliche, what is my talent, who am I story, that would seem done much better in Anaconda, My Little Pony, and Care Bears. Maybe the film could have worked if the majority of the jokes were not trying too hard to be trendy. In this movie, filled with fantasy elements such as wizards and fantastical creatures, we also get references to Zoom and DoorDash. Thankfully, the infamous influencer Smurf from the trailer did not make the final cut of the film. The plot is more or less the 2011 Neil Patrick Harris film again, where for some reason the Smurfs are sent to the human world, and this only matters for about 5 minutes, because for the majority of this film we spend time with creatures reminiscent of the Tribbles from Star Trek. Keeping the Smurfs in their own world would have made more sense. The film also cannot decide if it wants to be a musical or not. The film has a total of 3 musical numbers, and the rest of the soundtrack is a glorified commercial for Rihanna's music, who also provides the voice of Smurfette. Not since Dreamworks Home has a movie felt so self-indulgent. The 3 musical numbers that are in the film are forgettable, generic, mass-market pop music trash manufactured to make top 40 hits on the radio. Apart from a couple of mild swear words, the majority of the film isn't necessarily bad for kids. There aren't any bad messages or anything, but the film is not exactly the most enriching or best use of time. This past year we had Looney Tunes, Elio, and Zoopocalypse, all of which were much smarter. While kids may get some amusement out of it, the film provides nothing for adults. There are much better films to choose for your family movie night. Number 51, Odessa. Now, this was a movie I was really looking forward to. The trailer had all the right vibes for me. Hey, a dystopian future with the aesthetic of an 80s film that's also an 80s-style rock opera? That sounds awesome. And unfortunately, the concept is more interesting than the execution. There are some good ideas, but they're all very underdeveloped. It feels like it's borrowing from too many other stories. The rock opera album concept feels taken from Rush's 2112, which is a Rush album about the dystopian future. Bob's Burgers even kind of had an homage to that. It also feels like a gender-swapped version of George Orwell's 1984, with the villain being this charismatic leader who has eyes everywhere. The aesthetic feels very derivative of the Capitol from the Hunger Games, and the concept of the main character being a farm worker who has a destiny to defeat the evil overlord, that's the original Star Wars. Now, visually, it's very interesting, and at times feels like an A24 film, and the songs are all really good. There aren't any bad songs in this movie, and the people involved can actually sing. It doesn't sound overly auto-tuned. However, the segues to the songs do not feel natural. They feel forced in. The main character is very paper-thin without much of an arc, making it hard to care what happens to her. If you asked me to describe the main character, I honestly would not be able to tell you. Her love story is also very rushed. The film doesn't take the time to flesh out their relationship. It just uses her falling in love as a way to make things go bad for her in the second act. The side character she falls in love with has more of a character arc than she does. By the end of the film, it just feels very unsatisfying. The villain is this charismatic leader who is able to make the world into his own personal cult, and they don't give us much info about how the world got this way, or how he was able to take power and control people. It's mildly explained in like one or two sentences at the beginning, but again, there's a lot more potential that should have been further explained. This feels like a movie where they had the concept and outline and then wrote songs based on the outline, but when it came time to make a fully fledged story and script, they couldn't really think of anything, so they just worked from the outline. Just listen to the soundtrack, because besides the visuals, that's the only interesting thing about this film. It may be inspired by Rush, but the film itself is also rushed. Number 50, The Woman in the Yard. This movie, unfortunately, is going to contribute to the stigma of PG-13 horror films aren't scary, which is not true. I've seen plenty of PG-13 horror films that creep me out quite effectively, and some had really well-done stories. Unfortunately, this movie has neither a good story nor good scares. The film at times has some good psychological elements of having the main character and audience ask what's real and what's not real, and there is some creepy imagery. The film does work as a chamber piece, which is a movie where the main character is trapped in one location for most of the film. Examples of that are Disturbia, 10 Cloverfield Lane, and A Quiet Place or Shut In. But these are pieces that when put together as a whole picture don't really fit quite right. The film is riddled with horror movie cliches like the car not starting. The film comes off as very pretentious by trying to be a metaphor for grief and trauma, but the execution comes off as very confusing, as if the filmmakers were trying to make the movie smarter than it could be, and by the end it all falls apart. This is just kind of a background noise movie for someone's Halloween party. It doesn't do anything new or interesting. It checks all the boxes and goes exactly where you'd expect. If you like predictable and safe horror films, this is one you'll probably enjoy, but if you're looking for something innovative, this is a film you could skip. Number 49, a Minecraft movie, which I know is going to be a hot take that it's so low on this list, because despite barely having a plot and having phoned-in performances, this movie somehow grossed over $1 billion. How? In my opinion, this movie was a mess. The question, how do you make a successful, charming movie using an IP that has no story to begin with, was answered with The Lego Movie. This is The Lego Movie if it were bad. Now, when Jared Hess is the writer in addition to the director, the films turned out pretty good. Unfortunately, Hess is not the writer. This movie feels like a bunch of 40-somethings trying way too hard to appeal to the kids of today. The dialogue consists of, first we mine, and then we craft. Minecraft! And these lines are said without any sense of self-awareness or making a movie where the audience isn't on the joke. Indeed, it seems that just like the Lego Movie, making a movie about a property that you can do anything with should be a logical choice. Unfortunately, this lacks what the Lego Movie had: heart, humor, and charm. Hess's trademark is movies about nerdy misfits who are socially awkward but are charming. Napoleon Dynamite isn't so much of a plot-driven movie, but it works because the main character is relatable and charming. Here, none of the characters are memorable. Even Jack Black, who's worked with Hess before and made Nacho Libre some of Hess's best work, and brought a fun performance to previous video game movie Mario, just plays essentially a human version of Poe the Panda, except unlike Poe, Black's character has no growth. In fact, none of the characters have any growth. They just exist to move the plot forward without giving the audience any reason to care about them, and I do use the word plot generously and very, very loosely here. It's thin and has no flow. The jokes have no natural build-up or segue, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly who the main character of the film is or what the end goal is. This is a film that has no idea who it's for. The plot isn't interesting enough to keep the kids or adults engaged, and the humor is too childish for the adults, while at the same time not hitting the right notes for the kids either. A child at my screening tripped and fell as he was running during the movie, and that moment alone was more entertaining than the entirety of this film, and I'm sure any pain he felt was nothing compared to having to sit through it. In Minecraft, you need to have a foundation to build something, and this film has no foundation, so therefore it all falls apart. This is a film that should be buried in the netherworld. It's a film for pretty much nobody, and you could justifiably skip it. And the fact that it made over $1 billion with the sequel now in development is proof that we cannot have nice things. Number 48, Last Breath. A frustrating movie, because on paper it has all the ingredients for a tense claustrophobic thriller. The premise alone, several survival under extreme pressure in a confined space, should naturally create suspense, emotional investment, and white-knuckle tension. Unfortunately, the film never commits to developing its characters or the relationships between them, which makes it difficult to care when things start going wrong. We're told these people matter to each other, but we rarely feel it. As a result, the danger feels more mechanical than emotional. The pacing also works against the film. Instead of slowly tightening the screws and letting dread build, it rushes through moments that should linger and barely allows the audience to sit with the stakes. Visually and conceptually, there are flashes of what this movie could have been, but without stronger character work, those moments fall flat. In the end, Last Breath isn't terrible, it's just hollow, leaving behind a sense of wasted potential rather than a lasting impact. Number 47, Back in Action. A generic action movie released to Netflix back in January. And if you saw the trailer for it and thought, this looks pretty generic, I've seen this before and done much better, this is not going to surprise you. The plot has already been done at Mr. and Mrs. Smith. The plot is a generic spy movie, the action isn't that impressive, none of the jokes are funny, and honestly, everyone involved with this movie deserves better. Jamie Foxx, Cameron Diaz, Glenn Close, Kyle Chandler, even Andrew Scott, who I haven't seen since Sherlock ended and was pleasantly surprised to hear, are all great in other things. With this, you can tell that they're just there to get their paychecks and leave. This movie started production shortly after the COVID lockdowns ended, and movies started production again, and you can tell. Everyone there is just there to make a few bucks. There's no effort or passion put into this. It's painfully generic. It's a movie you can skip. Number 46, Karate Kid Legends. The newest entry in the series has some genuine strengths, but it's also a frustrating mixed bag. Let's start with the positives. Ned Wang and Sadie Stanley are both great in their roles, with Stanley especially shining as a compelling love interest. She previously played Kid Possible in the live-action Disney Channel movie, and hopefully this film gives her the breakout she deserves. The film is also the most mature of the series, exploring weighty themes like PTSD and survivor's guilt. It's also the only Karate Kid film to receive a PG-13 rating, and you can tell they're aiming for a deeper emotional tone. The fight choreography is slick and well executed, and visually the film holds up. But where it falls apart is in the narrative and pacing. The movie feels like a paint-by-numbers remake of the original. You can practically fill in the blanks as Karate Kid Badlands. Kid named Blank moves from blank to blank, meets love interest named Blank, fights bully named Blank, trains with Master Blank for a tournament. Except this film, it's not a reboot, it's a sequel, and that's where it becomes more frustrating. The film adds almost nothing new to the Karate Kid world. It feels like it only exists because Cobra Kai was a popular series, and not because it was a story that needed to be told. The main character already has a backstory with Jackie Chan's Mr. Han before the film starts, so there's no emotional journey in their relationship like we have with Daniel and Miyagi. If you're going into this movie excited to see Ralph Macchio and Jackie Chan on screen together, lower your expectations. They don't even meet until the last 30 minutes of the film, and most of their key scenes were spoiled in the trailer. The final tournament also feels rushed with very little build-up. At only around 90 minutes, the movie could have used another half hour to flesh out the story and give us more martial arts action. Overall, unless you're a die-hard Karate Kid fan, this one's skippable. Number 45, Lilo and Stitch. This is the M. Night Shyamalan Last Airbender of the Disney live-action remakes. It completely misses the heart and emotional weight of the original, which is especially strange considering the director previously did Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, which is a film just overflowing with charm. In contrast, Lilo and Stitch feels utterly soulless. While the CGI on the aliens, especially Jumba, is surprisingly good, many of the creative changes fall flat. Zach Galifianakis and Billy Magnussen do what they can as Jumba and Pleakley, but the choice to make them look like humans in holographic disguises robs the characters of their visual humor. Gantu is missing entirely, and Jumba is repurposed as the main villain without a redemption arc. Worst of all, Stitch is no longer destructive, just mischievous, removing his need for growth and nullifying the story's emotional arc. Lilo's character is heavily watered down. While the young actress playing her does a fine job, she's written without any of the original's unique quirks. Nani is miscast, overreacting or underacting with little consistency, and David is completely useless to the plot. Even the theme of Ohana is forgotten and confused by the end. There's no reason to watch this when the original still exists. It's inferior in every conceivable way. Between this and that Moana live-action remake coming out later this year, I think Disney has a timeshare in Hawaii. Number 44, How to Train Your Dragon. This is a movie that I'm very much of two minds on. On the one hand, from a technological and filmmaking perspective, I appreciate its ambition. It looks gorgeous, and the third act battle is epic. Though sometimes in shots where the human character is riding dragons, the CGI doesn't always blend well and you can see the green screen. But from a story perspective, it does nothing to justify its existence. Say what you will about the Disney remakes, but at least with some of those, I can somewhat see justification for the story changes. This does nothing new. It's essentially line for line and shot for shot the original film. Hollywood writers went on strike back in 2023, and yet it seems their job here was just to press copy and paste from the original script into a new Word document and call it a day. Any little bits that are added are unimportant and just feel like throwaway lines that were left on the cutting room floor of the original. Somehow, despite doing nothing new, the film is still a full half hour longer than the original. Much like the 2019 Lion King remake, it's longer because shots go on for unnecessarily longer periods of time. The actors all give good performances and manage to make it feel like their own instead of copying the original, but at the end of the day, it just feels like the movie exists for two reasons. One, to promote the new How to Train Your Dragon theme park area at Universal Orlando, and two, the director wanted a paid vacation to Iceland. This feels like a cover band doing a cover of your favorite song. It's fine, but it won't be the original. It's like when you make an amazing meal and then you refrigerate the leftovers and then you reheat them the next day. Still edible, but not as good as when it was fresh. Number 43, Tron Ares. The movie's biggest crime is it forgets to have fun. I found the story and characters incredibly bland. In Tron Legacy, the main character's father disappears for 20 years, and he finally reunites with him on the grid and has to defeat an evil version of him, and tries to get his dad to come back with him to the real world. He meets a program and becomes his girlfriend. She's an interesting character, a lot of personality. The action sequences and the score were fun. This has none of that. Ares is a boring character. Athena is a boring character. The villain is uninteresting and has the same level of hamminess as Jesse Eisenberg from Batman v Superman, and the stakes for the plot are unclear. They found a way to make programs into soldiers in the real world, but the catch is they can only survive for 30 minutes at a time. But no problem if the time expires, though. They can just bring them back anyway. So why is the MacGuffin a device called the Permanence Code that will grant them immortality? It's not like they can actually die. At least in Tron Legacy, when programs got to the rest of the game, it was permanent. Therefore, there were stakes for Cora and Sam. The movie is Tron in name only, and Tron isn't even in the movie. All the interesting plot threads left over from Legacy are thrown out here. How does Cora react to being in the real world? What are the pros and cons for her? Did she have kids? What happened to Clue? Why does Jeff Bridges still live in the grid when he could be reconnected with the sun? All questions that are never answered. It's not so much a movie, so much as it is a very long Nine Inch Nails music video. You know how artists have put out visual albums that have a slight resemblance of a plot, but are just glorified commercials for their latest album? That's what this is. At least with the Daft Punk score in Legacy, there was a compelling plot to go with it. This feels like music first and plot second, and the plot is barely there. This feels like a vanity project from Jared Leto. If you're not a fan of the franchise, this isn't going to win you over. And if you are a fan, don't waste your time with it. Don't even wait for Disney+. Number 42, Avatar Fire and Ash. Now, I am not really a fan of this franchise. I thought the first one was a cool concept, even though it was derivative of other movies, and the second one just felt like a less interesting version of the first one. And this third one did not win me over. Thankfully, the message of the film isn't as heavy-handed or repetitive as the previous two films, and the new villain in this one is actually a fair bit compelling than the villain from the previous two films. But James Cameron said he wrote Avatar Way of Water and realized it was too long to make into one movie, so he split the script into two films. And you can tell. The film feels like two different movies. The first act feels like an hour-long final act of Way of Water before kicking off the story for the last one. Of course, visually the film is gorgeous, but I've said before and I'll say it again, these movies feel like a compilation of video game cutscenes. There are some well-done action scenes in this movie, but again, it just feels like you're watching someone play a video game, and it probably would have worked better as one. There's a scene involving a prison break that would make a great stealth level. There are scenes that feel like a first-person shooter, but if you're merely watching it not experiencing, what's the point? I didn't really care that much about the characters, so the scenes that are supposed to pack an emotional punch didn't really resonate with me. I know the CGI is praised, but honestly, I think we've hit the peak of CGI. The first Avatar was impressive at the time, but now it's just not that unique. I don't really have that much to say. I'm still indifferent on these films. If you're a fan, you'll probably adore it because they work at character arcs, but if you're not a fan, it's not going to convert you. It's for fans only. Number 41, Freakier Friday. I feel like this is a movie that was supposed to go straight to Disney Plus, but because Disney had such a huge string of box office bombs in 2023, they put this in theaters to try and recoup the loss. The film is frustrating because it has some fun ideas, but it doesn't take the time to explore them as much as it should. The idea of 3 different generations getting swapped should be fun, but the jokes are all the same jokes as the first film. Jamie Lee Curtis's old jokes, realizing that now she's younger, she's eating junk food, it's all the same. Even the plot is more or less the same as the original. Lindsay Lohan's character is marrying a guy that her kid doesn't like, so when they swap, they try to break them up, blah blah, we've seen it before. This movie just feels like cheap nostalgia cash grabbing without doing anything to justify its existence. The only good joke was the subtle reference to the movie Mean Girls at the beginning. This just feels like a reunion tour, but all the character development from the first film has been essentially thrown out the window. Chad Michael Murray's character still has a thing for Jamie Lee Curtis over 20 years later, and the third act is so melodramatic it feels like a soap opera. The writers were so focused on getting members of the cast to return that they forgot to write anything smart or interesting. If you enjoyed the first one and you want to see the cast reunite, it's worth streaming on Disney+, but if you're sick of legacy sequels and do nothing new and just rehash the first plot of the movie, you can skip this one. Number 40, Megan 2.0, a sequel that feels less like a natural evolution and more like contractual obligation. Where the first film surprised its blend of campy horror, tech paranoia, and dark humor, this follow-up fails to recapture that same spark or offer anything remotely fresh. The original Megan wasn't revolutionary, but had a clear voice. This one simply exists. From a thematic standpoint, Megan 2.0 has absolutely nothing new to say about the dangers of AI, screen addiction, or the increasingly blurred line between tech and parenting. These are timely issues, but the film brings no added depth, insight, or twist to them. It's recycling the same beats we've seen in 1,000 other AI gone rogue stories. Perhaps worse than its lack of originality is its failure to entertain. The first film, for all its flaws, had a sharp, self-aware sense of humor that gave it personality. Megan 2.0 seems to forget it's supposed to be fun. The tone is neither scary enough to work as a horror film, nor clever enough to work as a comedy or satire. The attempts at humor fall flat, and the movie is surprisingly humorless for a franchise that became a viral meme machine. Narratively, it doesn't expand on the ideas or characters from the first film in any meaningful way. Instead of growing the mythology or diving deeper into Megan's psyche, it veers off into a weird and unsatisfying direction. It feels like it was written during a brainstorming session that no one edited. It's not bold, it's just baffling. Honestly, this feels like the Joker 2 of Megan movies, the sequel that was never meant to happen, and greenlit only because the first movie made more money than expected. It feels like a movie they made bad on purpose, as if the creative team wanted to signal they were done with the story. At least when Gremlins 2 or Happy Death Day to You went off the rails, they did so with tongue-in-cheek flair and a self-aware wink. Megan 2.0 lacks that self-awareness and energy. It's not loud enough to be fun, not smart enough to be interesting, and not scary enough to be thrilling. Number 39, Happy Gilmore 2. The original is not a movie that I grew up with. The first time I watched it was a couple years back on Netflix, and apart from the crasser humor, I enjoyed it enough, but it's not a movie I ever got back and rewatched, so this is not a movie I was particularly clamoring for. And the sequel is okay enough. Considering it's a long overdue comedy sequel, it's slightly better than I was expecting it to be, but that doesn't necessarily make it good. The beginning is very frustrating, because it basically undoes everything the first film led up to. A lot of the jokes are basically retreads of jokes from the first film, and 80% of the movie is just quick flashback clips. They're trying to remind the audience of the first movie, hoping the nostalgia baiting will make them more positive on the film like some Pavlovian experiment. The film suffers from Disney sequelitis. What I mean by that is it takes beloved characters and then makes them old and depressed. Indiana Jones, Buzz Lightyear, Luke Skywalker, he's in that same camp, and nobody wants to see that. Come on. Sandler's brand of man-child comedy doesn't really work when he's almost 60 years old. The plot is very reminiscent of Cars 3, where it's the older main character competing with younger athletes and new technology. There are a few mildly amusing jokes here and there, but it's not enough to justify returning to the golf course. Number 38, Star Trek Section 31. This had a very different flavor than the other Star Trek films, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. The films based on Next Generation had a different style than ones based on the original series, and the Chris Pine movies were very different from all of those, so I didn't mind it too much. Some people may not like that the soundtrack consists of pop rock music, but if you remember, the Chris Pine ones had Beastie Boys in the soundtrack, so it didn't feel that out of place to me. This is a Trek film that stands on its own and doesn't expect you to have any prior knowledge of anything, similar to how Moon Knight was a pretty good standalone MCU project, how the first season of Mandalorian was pretty standalone. Michelle Yeoh does a great job with the film. The tone is basically Suicide Squad meets Guardians of the Galaxy, and as someone who enjoyed both of those films, I enjoyed this one as well. Now, there are some pacing issues, particularly with how the film feels somewhat episodic, like this was originally supposed to be a series and they changed the movie at the last second. The actor who plays the villain can also overreact a bit at times, feel pretty cartoony. The humor in the movie also feels a bit forced, and for me it didn't work, and the dialogue that was supposed to be humorous fell really flat. What the film does well is slick action sequences and editing. If you're not a Trekkie and you're just looking for a fun time, this is for you, but I can see why the Trekkie loyalists might not enjoy it. Basically, if you saw the trailer and thought, this isn't for me, it's not going to surprise you. If you saw the trailer and thought, this looks fun, it's worth checking out. Number 37, SpongeBob, The Search for Squarepants. I've said before that aside from the new movies being released, I haven't cared about SpongeBob in about 15 years or so, and I was pleasantly surprised by the Plankton movie, because I found it clever and reminiscent of the golden age of SpongeBob. This movie, however, reminded me why I haven't watched new SpongeBob in a decade and a half. It's not as unwatchable as that Sandy movie that came out last year, but my word was this thin. The original SpongeBob movie was this big screen adventure that felt like something you couldn't get from a typical episode. The ones after that, including this one, just feel like TV specials. The writing for this movie is unfortunately very lazy and unimaginative. The characters all feel like Flanderizations of themselves. The few jokes that do work are just repeats of jokes from early SpongeBob, such as Davy Jones' locker literally being a locker. And the character journey for SpongeBob is, Sammy for this before, trying to prove to Mr. Krabs that he's a man. They even call him a bubble blowing baby boy several times in the movie, which is lifted directly from the first one. I got a few mild chuckles at best, but nothing that made me laugh super hard like back in the day. This feels like the first movie if the majority of it took place in the trench with monsters, instead of just 10 minutes of it. Also, the film is very chaotic, seeming to cater to the brains of the TikTok and YouTube Shorts generation. It's harmless enough for kids, but this is a movie where, unlike old SpongeBob, there's not really anything for the parents. If Zootopia 2 is still playing, go see that again instead of this. But this is the only kids movie playing, and you want the kids out of the house to get last-minute preparations done. Hire a sitter or get an older relative to take them. This was more stale than a Krabby Patty, left out for a week. 6. Paddington and Peru. The first two Paddington movies are cute little stories that involve a bear getting into all sorts of mischief, albeit with good intentions. He's essentially a Winnie the Pooh clone. The charm of the Paddington films is they're simple. So while that takes a backseat to make this a jungle adventure movie, it doesn't feel like the same world established in the previous films at all. It feels like someone wrote this as a family jungle adventure movie, and then for some reason they decided to make the Paddington film, and the two films do not mesh well at all. And the odd thing is they recast Sally Hawkins with the first two films, and this is a film where one of the themes is the kids of the family approaching adulthood and trying to find their identity and going out on their own. And the actress they recast looks quite a bit younger than the previous actress. With the villainous Antonio Banderas, a pretty cliche but still kind of decent story and some fun peril, this could have worked if it were a family goes on a cruise in the jungle and gets involved in the Pirates movie, not related to Paddington. But because it is Paddington, it just feels so out of left field from the other two films. It's very schmaltzy and not in the charming and endearing way the other two films were. It's one of those, maybe the real treasure was the friends we made type movie. It's generic, it feels like a loss of identity. It's not unbearable, but I'm not particularly positive on it either. Number 35, In Your Dreams. The best thing I can say about it is that it's pretty harmless. There aren't any negative messages, there's nothing overly obnoxious, and it's definitely not as grating as some other kid-turning movies that came out this year, such as Smurfs. But with the premise built entirely around the limitless world of dreams, the movie should have been so much more imaginative than it actually is. The middle act, which should be the highlight of the film, rushes through different dream environments so quickly that none of them leave any real impression. The idea of traveling through dreams offers infinite potential for creativity, surreal visuals, and unique characters. And instead, we get the equivalent of a fast-forward montage. Nothing has room to breathe. The biggest issue, though, is how hugely derivative the movie feels. All of its best ideas are borrowed from better films. You can see elements of Shark Boy Lava Girl all over this thing, and the sanitized, scary dream world concept feels like somebody watched Nightmare on Elm Street, Coraline, and a little bit of WandaVision and said, let's keep the structure, but remove anything that might actually be scary. The result is a movie that looks familiar at every turn, but without the boldness or identity in the films it feels like it's imitating. And then you have the Sandman's helpers, who are basically discount minions. They're small, round, chaotic creatures clearly meant to be comic relief and sell toys. Except they barely show up, have no memorable moments, and feel like they were added because kids like goofy characters, not because the story needed them. The humor is also very lowbrow, like some of DreamWorks' early films. The jokes are basic, very safe, and squarely aimed at young kids. This is absolutely a kids' movie and not a family movie. Adults won't be begging for it to be over, but they're also not going to walk away quoting jokes or remembering anything specific. And even though this movie was written by a former Pixar employee, that employee is the one who wrote The Good Dinosaur, which, much like this movie, is harmless, pleasant, but extremely forgettable. Not bad, not painful, not offensive, just something that will fade from your memory pretty quickly. Will kids enjoy it? Absolutely. It's colorful, it moves fast, and it's never scary or mean-spirited. Will adults remember it after they finish it? Probably not. For me, In Your Dreams is like most of my dreams. I forgot about it by the time I woke up the next day. Number 34, Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Fowl. The film has sharp dialogue and visual gags and puns typical of Aardman. However, the plot, while still good, doesn't seem as clever as it could be. The plot revolves around AI, the dangers of an over-reliance on technology, but it doesn't really present anything new with the idea, and it doesn't satirize it like the way the Were-Rabbit movies satirize monster movies, or Chicken Run satirize prison and spy movies. It's still entertaining, but it's not exactly Aardman's A-game. Number 33, Electric State. The aesthetic of the world is interesting, and the world of the film could be more intriguing if the movie's world building wasn't so rushed. There's a lot of exposition in the first 15 minutes, and it's all told rather than shown. There could be some cool ideas here about an alternate 1990s where robots have risen up against the humans and we're at war, even though that premise has been done to death, but everything in this movie feels very safe. But the film has huge stars such as Chris Pratt, Millie Bobby Brown, Giancarlo Esposito, and Ke Quan. They all feel very typecast. Pratt is basically Star-Lord again. Esposito is the same type of villain he plays in everything else, and even Ke Quan's character just feels like Data from the Goonies, but as an adult. The film also has a ton of forced Marvel Cinematic Universe style humor, and none of the jokes land. There's also a lot of forced product placement and 90s references. It's like the Pepsi product placement from Adam Webb, the Olive Garden product placement from Sonic the Hedgehog, and all the 90s references from Captain Marvel were taken as inspiration. I feel like this movie had a lot of studio interference. I feel like the Russos wanted to make this dark, grungy, gritty sci-fi film with a hard PG-13 or maybe even an R rating, but the Netflix executives who spent $320 million, the most expensive movie they've ever made, wanted to play it safe due to the high cost. As a result, the film feels incredibly generic, almost like it was found in a scrapyard and pieced back together, even if the parts don't necessarily fit. The villains are generic and boring, the main characters are pretty thin and uninteresting, and the tone feels very all over the place. The film overall just feels very formulaic. I feel like this is the type of movie that's going to get a much better director's cut with a more consistent tone and story that makes more sense, rather than this automaton of a film. If you like generic drop your brain movies to have on as background noise and are watching a lazy weekend, you might find something to enjoy, but for me, this movie lacked a creative spark. Number 32, Eternity. This was a movie I was very excited for, because it's got Miles Teller and Elizabeth Olsen, and on top of that, it looked like a very sweet, charming little movie. And for the most part, it was, but there were also a lot of problematic elements I was not too fond of. This movie does feel like it's borrowing from movies that have explored the concept of the afterlife before, such as Coco, Beetlejuice, and the TV show The Good Place. It has good performances, the cast all have great chemistry with each other, it can be very sweet and charming as well as witty, and it feels like a movie from an older, simpler time. However, what charm the movie has is, unfortunately, lost in the shuffle of jokes and moments that caused the PG-13 rating, which is a shame, because if the movie cleaned up its act, it could have been a PG. Also, as a Christian, I wasn't too thrilled with some of the ideas this movie presents. The movie depicts the afterlife as a place where you're not held accountable for your actions in life. There's no mention of God, unless you count these several times his name is taken in vain, and there's no mention of eternal punishment for the wicked. It kind of says that everybody, regardless of choices in life, gets happiness in some form. And some of the eternities or dimensions that the characters choose even glorify simple lifestyles. The movie was basically a man creating God in his own image. If you're not religious, you might not be as offended as I was, but as a religious person, I cannot in good conscience recommend the movie due to it being doctrinally incorrect, as well as its unfortunate fair amount of sexual content and crass humor. Number 31, Anaconda. Now, I saw the first Anaconda movie right before seeing this new one, so I have no nostalgia for the original, and I was fully aware that this one is a self-aware parody, and I wanted to be on the joke. And while the film is entertaining, the premise seems more fitting for a Super Bowl commercial than it is a full-length feature. Most of the jokes are amusing enough, Although there aren't any that are facepalmingly bad, there are still quite a few that don't land, and of course, the worst jokes are the ones that they linger on for the most amount of time. The film also has an odd mix of tones, trying to be a self-aware meta-parody of Anaconda while also trying to be a creepy creature feature, and it never really fully commits to either. Despite the odd mix of tones, there is still a fair bit of love put into the movie. Black and Red's characters definitely have a passion for what they're doing despite the setbacks. The whole cast works well with each other, and while you don't need to have seen the original film to understand it, there are a few jokes and callbacks you'll appreciate if you have. Unfortunately, there also feels to be a sense of not having enough material to make a full film. Like I said, a short internet video used as a Super Bowl commercial or something might have worked, but as a full film, it can feel like at times it overstays its welcome. The meta-commentary doesn't necessarily say anything new about Hollywood, and its seemingly perpetual state of originality. In fact, some of the jokes were used in the 2022 Disney Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers movie, which coincidentally has a cameo from Paul Rudd, and it can come off as self-excusingly lazy. While the film won't necessarily have any rewatch value and is more of a novelty, it's also not a bad way to kill 90 minutes. Number 30, F1. This plays like a live-action remake of Cars, and I mean that the best way possible. But let's get the obvious out of the way. Brad Pitt is 60 years old. The average age of a Formula 1 driver? Around 25. So yeah, it's a bit of a stretch to buy into the idea of him climbing into a high-speed death machine with the reflexes of someone young enough to be his son. But to Pitt's credit, he makes it work. He's not playing a character of a comeback kid. He's grizzled, charismatic, and grounded. It's more about mentorship, resilience, and legacy than it is about raw speed. That shift makes the age gap feel more like a feature than a bug. What really helps sell it, though, is the dynamic between Pitt and co-star Damson Idris. Those two bounce off each other with witty, natural banter. Idris holds his own against Pitt both dramatically and charismatically, making the mentor-mentee relationship feel authentic and compelling. As someone who doesn't follow Formula One or racing in general, I found the film surprisingly accessible. The racing sequences are impressively shot, using a mix of practical effects and immersive camera work that keeps the adrenaline pumping without becoming disoriented. Director Joseph Kosinski, who did Top Gun Maverick, knows how to frame motion. The sound design alone is worth its ticket price. This is one of those films you want to see on the biggest, loudest screen possible. That said, I do feel the target audience skewed a bit older. As someone in my late 20s, I could sense this movie was targeting more directly to the midlife crowd. It will definitely play better for those in their 40s and 50s. Still, even if you're not the ideal demographic, there's a lot to enjoy here. The racing is thrilling, the characters are likable, and the overall execution is polished and earnest. It's not groundbreaking cinema, but it doesn't need to be. You'll be glad you saw Brad make a pit stop. Number 29, Bad Guys 2. I wasn't a huge fan of the first film. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. I was pretty indifferent on it. Well, this is the same studio that brought us How to Train Your Dragon, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and The Wild Robot. These films don't exactly seem like their A-game. The film, just like the first, is essentially a fusion of Zootopia and Ocean's 11, but this time a dash of Despicable Me thrown in. Usually second entries in a Dreamworks franchise end up being just as good or even better than the first one. But there are exceptions, and this is one of them. The main problem is the main plotline about the bad guys trying to stop the bad girls doesn't kick in until halfway through, in what is already a very short movie. The story overall is somewhat better, but the pacing is off. And the third act, like I said, is essentially the same as the third act of Despicable Me. The sequel doesn't really do what all great sequels do, which is further the story and characters. This just feels like more of the same, and the conclusion isn't even that satisfying, because it spends the last 10 minutes desperately trying to set up the pieces for a potential third film. It's harmless enough fun for kids, but I don't really see most adults getting much enjoyment out of it. If your kids like the first one, you should wait to rent it, and if you're not someone with kids, there's no reason to spend your time on this one. Number 28, Wicked for Good. From a filmmaking standpoint, it's very well made, it has great cinematography, most of the performances have a lot of emotion behind them, but it's the writing and pacing that I found to be weak. The first part had a pretty good gap between the songs, and the songs were memorable and upbeat, and even rewatching it, I've had a good number of them still stuck in my head. But with this one, not only is the film not really given much room to breathe because there is such a short wait between the songs, but most of the songs are either reprises of songs from part 1 with different lyrics, or just really boring. There was a total of 2 songs in this film that I actually enjoyed, and even then, one of them is just a ripoff of Kill the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, or Savages from Pocahontas. I was also very disappointed with the much darker, more mature direction this film took. It is a drastic departure from part 1. If you saw part 1 on a nice family outing and you have younger kids that are eagerly waiting part 2, I'm sorry to say the film really pushes the PG rating, not only in terms of how bleak it gets, but also how suggestive it can get certain scenes as well. Yeah, the opening number of part 1 is basically stated the witch's mom had an affair, but it was done in a way that I think would fly over kids' heads. But here, there's a slow jam musical number between Alphabet and another character. It's very suggestive with the choreography. And then when that musical number ends, you see him shirtless, and it's implied that she is as well. Compared to part 1, that's pretty jarring. On top of that, the motivations for Alpha just become incredibly stupid. The first one you could argue was a cautionary tale about how she was a victim of prejudice and made some very bad choices, but here it throws that out the window and makes her a misunderstood hero. The Wicked Witch of the West. One of the most iconic villains in cinema. A villain so scary that an episode of Sesame Street featuring her was banned, and Mr. Rogers had to have the actress on his show to show kids that she's actually a nice lady who's just playing dress-up. Nah, she's a misunderstood heroine. Films like Joker and Cruella are examples of how to do this kind of story correctly, where you don't sympathize with them in the end. But this one, you do. You never actually see her do anything that wicked, or understand why the Ozians have motivation to kill her, other than believing the lies and propaganda by people in charge. She's not the Wicked Witch of the West, she's the misunderstood Witch of the West. But I guess that title wouldn't be as enticing. Overall, I just did not enjoy this one as much. Number 27, K-pop Demon Hunters. And I know a lot of people are gonna hate me putting it so low on this list because this movie is just absolutely killing it on Netflix, and it's been this worldwide phenomenon. But honestly, I don't get the hype. I enjoyed the film, but I don't get the hype. But imagine if Sailor Moon joined a K-pop girl group, did with Scott Pilgrim, turned the Hex Girls from the Scooby-Doo movie, and then opened it for those evil sirens in the My Little Pony Equestrian Girls sequel. That's basically the vibe of K-pop Demon Hunters. And weirdly enough, it kind of works. It's an original story, but it's refreshing in a market overrun by sequels and franchise spinoffs. And while the movie borrows from a lot of influences, they manage to mesh them all together into something that feels uniquely its own. The tone is hyper stylized, snappy, and frequently self-aware, and it's much funnier than I was expecting. Clever and never taking itself too seriously. Once again, Sony Animation proves it's one of the most creatively daring studios out there. Visually, K-pop Demon Hunters pops with vibrant color palettes, flashy fight choreography, and expressive animation. It's stylish and knows exactly what it wants to be. A chaotic, candy-colored demon-slaying musical. But like I said, I don't understand the hype, and I think it's a bit overrated. While the aesthetic and energy are top tier, the character development doesn't quite hit the same highs. Only one member of the girl group who's the lead gets anything resembling an arc. She's navigating a forbidden love story that gives the movie some emotional weight and stakes, but the other two girls just feel like glorified backup dancers. They're there, they crack a few jokes, they sing, they fight demons, but they don't really grow or evolve in meaningful ways. Plot-wise, it's the classic defeat evil with the power of friendship tale. It leans hard into cliche. The best of SpongeBob's first 4 seasons, which again, makes sense since Plankton's voice actor is one of the co-writers on this movie. There were a ton of jokes I thought were hilarious, which is more than I could say for the other SpongeBob movie sequels, which, at their best, give me a mild chuckle. There's a lot of throwbacks to classic SpongeBob episodes, such as Plankton's Army, the Sweet Victory song, and even the first SpongeBob movie. This is a musical, and the songs really have a nice amount of time between them. There weren't any where I thought, really? We just had a song, can we move on? And the songs are all really catchy and great. There weren't any that I was waiting to be over. They're all really clever and funny. The musical numbers each have a distinct musical and animation style, which gives them a nice variety and helps them stand out, not blend together. For example, one of Plankton's songs is animated in a rubber hose style, and has a musical tone that feels like it's from the era. Karen's song is, of course, techno. Making Karen the main villain this time around is a nice, fresh idea. I realized with this movie that Karen and Plankton are all like Draken and Shigo from Kim Possible. Plankton and Draken are the slightly incompetent megalomaniacs obsessed with destroying their archenemy, and Karen and Shigo are the real evil geniuses who hate having to put up with them, especially after they always fail. And much like that one Kim Possible movie where Kim and Ron visit the future where Shigo has got rid of Draken and taken over herself, Karen does manage to just say, fine, I'll do it myself. There are a few story issues, mainly with previously established continuity. It's implied that Plankton's first time trying a Krabby Patty and becoming obsessed with getting the formula are at the Krusty Krab, where there's a whole episode showing that Mr. Krabs and Plankton created the patty together as kids. Karen knows Plankton's first name Sheldon after he creates her, even though there was an episode where she finds out his name is Sheldon and laughs at him. But then again, SpongeBob has never had much film continuity, and these aren't major issues like the Sponge on the Run movie, where it says SpongeBob and Sandy met as kids at summer camp. Even in the first episode of the show, they met in an entirely different way. I can excuse that. There's also really not that much difference between this movie and typical episodes of the show. The first SpongeBob had a massive scale and story that could have only worked as a film. This one kind of feels like a long TV special. In something like the Rugrats movie or the Bob's Burgers movie, the plots feel cinematic, where the stakes are much bigger than episodes of the show, which is a problem with a lot of movies based on shows. Unfortunately, they just feel like longer episodes. Despite some very minor narrative issues, the Plankton movie is great for adults who grew up with the heyday of SpongeBob and the kids who watch it now. It's a welcome return to the pineapple, or I guess the chum bucket under the sea. Number 25, Snow White. Again, hot take. I know a lot of y'all are going to be mad this wasn't on the worst list or that it was a lot lower, but hear me out. I was very skeptical and turned off by all the negative publicity and some of the odd decisions they made for this film, but I think at the end of the day, it's actually better than the original. Again, hear me out. For one, the characters are a lot richer and better written. In the original, what is Snow White like? Think about it. Just this very happy person who does not have a lot of depth to her. In this version, she actually has a character arc. And even the Queen, who in my Disney animated films ranking I said was the best part of the film, still doesn't have a lot of depth to her in that version. She's just Maine and wants to kill Snow White because she's Maine. In this version, she's actually a lot more evil as she rules the kingdom with an iron fist, and we see the people suffering under her reign. And the relationship between Snow White and the prince is better written. In the original, they only have 2 scenes. Their screen time together is 2 minutes at best. In this version, they have a better fleshed out relationship, and despite some comments the actress made about the version not focusing on her love story, they actually do have a love story, and it's a lot more meaningful than the original. Rachel Zegler has a better singing voice than the original version. The original sounds screechy, but her voice is more melodious. Another issue the film fixes is there are a lot of new songs in this film, and the songwriters are the same as La La Land, The Greatest Show, and Spirited, and all the new songs are great. Besides Hi Ho, what songs from the original does anybody really remember? In this version, the Evil Queen gets a villain song, and it's one of the better Disney villain songs we've gotten in a while. Between this, the villain song in that Mufasa movie, and the villain song in Moana 2, I think Disney villain songs are starting to make a comeback. Though an issue with Gal Gadot's villain song is her choreography looks like a car dealership inflatable. Another issue is her villain song is reprised when she turns into the witch. And even though one of the lyrics explicitly states that one of the ingredients will change her voice, her singing voice still sounds the same, even after turning into the witch. In the original, Snow White is called Snow White because her skin is fair as snow, but in this version, she's called Snow White because she's born during a blizzard. That's like giving birth to a boy in the car on the way to the hospital and naming him Carson. Zegler's still pretty good at this film, though. Now, a huge controversy before the film came out was a set photo that allegedly showed the dwarves as humans, and that was taken out of context. Those characters are actually a gang of bandits. And while the bandits as characters aren't that memorable, having Snow White's love interest be the leader of the bandits, who's a swashbuckling bad boy who has a bit of a Han and Leia dynamic with her, was a pretty great choice. But it also seems like they took the bandits idea from Mirror Mirror, where the dwarves were bandits. But I think this is a movie that could appeal to both genders, whereas the original is arguably made exclusively for girls. I think boys can get a lot out of the swashbuckling action, and Snow White as a character is a positive role model, though it does feel like they took a lot of what they did with Jasmine in the live-action Aladdin and redid that here. But they wrote the strong female character without it feeling forced. I like how they did it. And of course, I gotta talk about the elephant in the room, the CGI dwarves. I'll give it to you on that one, these things look awful. It's too reminiscent of the characters from Polar Express. Did they forget that the scariest part of the movie was supposed to be the queen and not the dwarves? Another issue is the look of the film looks very similar to the other live-action Disney fairy tale live-action remakes. If I were to Photoshop the characters out of screenshots from this movie and ask you if they were from Snow White, Beauty and the Beast, Maleficent, or Aladdin, you probably wouldn't be able to tell me. At least with things like Cruella, for example, the film had a very different aesthetic and vibe than some of the other remakes. Honestly, I think if this were just a Snow White movie not released by Disney, people would be a lot less harsh on it. A lot of people hold the original a special place in their heart, so to see it remade almost seems blasphemous to them, but come on, folks. Disney was not the first to adapt Snow White. There have been countless other versions. This does enough that's new to justify it without changing it so much it's unrecognizable. While it's not a must-see, I'm happy to say this isn't the disaster people were making out to be. Number 24, The Life List. Now, honestly, if one of my celebrity crushes, Sophia Carson, wasn't in this movie, I probably would not have watched it. She was the only reason I had any interest in this movie, and I'm actually kind of glad I watched it. It's a very sweet little story with good characters. It was weird hearing Sophia swear in this movie, though, since she's a former Disney actress, and I get it, it's not actually her, it's a character, but it's just jarring to me. This was a good drama that had some good plot twists. A movie like this can sometimes come off as forced or disingenuous, like movies trying to force you to feel something, but it all felt very natural. I like that this was a story about a daughter getting closer to their late mother by fulfilling all the childhood dreams she gave up on. I think the love story was a bit mixed, though. I'm not a fan of love triangles, I think they're stupid. I also think that maybe the story needed more time to develop the romance between the two leads. This is a very sweet, heartfelt movie about forgiveness, living your best life, love, and becoming a better person. And considering I'm not the largest audience for this movie, I'm not a girl between the ages of high school and my 30s, I enjoyed this more than I probably should have. It's a nice little drama, and it's worth streaming. Number 23, Zootopia 2. I'm happy to say that for the most part, this does what a good sequel should do, which is expand the lore and world established in the original. However, on a plot level, it also feels very familiar. The anti-prejudice message is essentially the same. There are certain plot beats that are too familiar, and it has a lot of the Betty comedy tropes and cliches you get in this type of movie. The first film felt like it had creative world building with jokes thrown in that complemented it. This time it feels like they put jokes first. Number 23, Zootopia 2. I'm happy to say that for the most part, this does what a good sequel should do, which is expand the lore and world established in the original. However, on a plot level, it also feels very familiar. The anti-prejudice message is essentially the same. There are certain plot beats that are too familiar, and has a lot of the buddy comedy tropes and cliches you get in this type of movie. The first film felt like it had creative world building with jokes thrown in that complemented it. This time it felt like they put jokes first and plot second. The jokes are great, several of which are self-deprecating towards Disney. And this is some of the hardest I've laughed at an animated film recently. However, there are also a few jokes that feel dated, such as not one, but two references to What Does the Fox Say? Even when the first film came out, that video was old. But if we're going to make a sequel to Zootopia... If we're going to make a sequel to Zootopia, more of the world should be explored, and I feel it didn't quite live up to its full potential. The plot has the same problem as Frozen 2, where it spends more time than it should reminding you about things you liked about the first film, and hopes that it will distract you from seeing the plot this time around isn't quite as strong. There is a great voice cast here, with Patrick Warburton and Keane Kwan being standouts. Warburton is hilarious as always, Kwan is a very lovable character, and there's even some family joining in this time, as the husband of Jennifer Goodwin, who plays Judy, has a voice cameo in this film, and the husband and wife duo of Macaulay Culkin and Brenda Song will provide voice roles as well. If you enjoyed the first film, you'll likely enjoy this one, but unless you have kids who desperately want to see it, wait for Disney+. It's solid, but doesn't quite hit the same highs as the first. Number 22, Rental Family. I really enjoyed the humor in this movie, where it pokes fun at aspects of both Japanese and American culture, and some of the cultural differences. The movie was directed by a Japanese woman, and you can tell this is very much a passion project for her. Brendan Fraser does a great job at playing the everyman type character, and brings both emotion and humor to the film. The film was heartwarming and charming, and overall, for the most part, it did put a smile on my face. But it does suffer from a few narrative issues, particularly with the narrative structure and pacing. The main focus of the film comes down to basically two main plot lines, about Fraser's character playing the role of a father of a little girl, and the role of a journalist to a retired actor. And both of these plot lines have their heartwarming and charming moments, but the film also has a montage of the other people that hire Fraser, and maybe those could have been explored more instead of rushing through them. Also, the flow can be a bit rocky at times. Jumping back and forth between the two main plot lines can feel a bit disjointed, and there are some subplots with other characters that just feel like they're there and aren't as interesting. And disappointingly, there is unfortunately some unneeded mild sexual content that gives the film a PG-13 rating, which very easily could have been a PG. The plot in the second half also gets very predictable. I figured out for the most part where it was going to go, and it didn't really do much to subvert expectations. It's a charming, heartfelt movie, but the pacing and narrative structure bring it down a bit, and you can do as the title says and wait to rent it. Number 21, Now You See Me, Now You Don't. It seems kind of odd as this is essentially a legacy sequel, since this franchise isn't really all that nostalgic. Yeah, it's been 10 years since the last one, but 10 years is not that much. It's not like people were as excited to see these characters return as they were, say, the original Star Wars cast return for The Force Awakens. And it's also bizarre that a lot of the generation gap humor comes from Jesse Eisenberg. Jesse Eisenberg is not that old. He's only 10 or 15 years older than the youngest member of the cast. It would have made more sense to have Woody Harrelson be the one to be condescending to the younger generation and have him be the mentor. Now, the movie also has a different director. It's directed by the same guy that did the Uncharted movie a couple years back, so as a result, it does have a very different style than the previous two movies. Where the first two were Ocean's 11 type movies, this feels more like Uncharted, with more focus on puzzles than it does heist and illusion. It still works, but it's also jarringly different. That being said, the old and new casts do work well off each other, and while the film arguably isn't as witty as the first film, it has plenty of well-choreographed action to make up for it. There's one sequence in particular that's all filmed in one shot, or at least edited to appear that way. And considering there's 8 characters in this sequence, not counting the bad guys, it's impressively done. So while the style and tone are different and some of the dialogue feels assigned to the wrong character, it's still a fun entry in the franchise. Number 20, The Amateur. Taken, John Wick, the Bourne series, these are all action films that are male hero fantasy. What man in his 40s hasn't thought about what he'd do in the hypothetical situation of his wife or daughter being harmed? What lengths would he go to? Indeed, The Amateur is one of these films, but unlike the Liam Neesons or Keanu Reeves of the action movie world, our hero does not have a particular set of skills. At least, not action skills. Our hero's greatest weapon is his mind. This is like the Hitman games, where the player sets elaborate traps to eliminate targets. There are some fun kills in this movie, and it does play with the action hero trope, as the main character cannot hit the broadside of a barn. There's one particularly funny scene where he has to use YouTube to learn how to pick a lock. The film has well-done melee action and a great conspiracy thriller plot. While the film's plot can be a bit paint by numbers at points, the main character is interesting enough that the film is still engaging. It's got a bit of everything. Action, revenge, romance, conspiracy. If you're looking for a fun action movie to check out, this is worth it. Number 19, The Naked Gun. The film has all the slapstick, sharp-witty dialogue and taking things literally that the franchise is known for. Liam Neeson does a fantastic job playing up the deadpan humor. He's basically his cop character from the Lego movie, but with jokes aimed at an older audience. There's some callbacks and references to the previous Naked Gun films, but they're done in a way that don't feel forced. And this is a movie that will require multiple viewings, as there are a ton of background gags and dialogue you'll miss from laughing at the previous dialogue. But in terms of the level of PG-13, it is a particularly hard PG-13 in terms of the humor. There's one scene in particular that's a very long sex joke that goes on for a couple of minutes, but I'd say it's about the same level as the other films. That is to say, this is not a family PG-13 like Fantastic Four or Superman. It's very much for older kids and adults. It's sophomoric and lowbrow humor at points, and that's not going to be for everyone. This is one of the smartest comedies to come out in a while. I highly recommend it if you're in the appropriate age group. Number 18, Captain America Brave New World. When this movie was announced, I was very pessimistic. They announced it right after the finale, Falcon and Winter Soldier, which was a show I was more negative on. And they announced that the director is the same as Cloverfield Paradox, which, as a standalone movie not connected to Cloverfield, is watchable, but as a Cloverfield movie, is not good. There were all these reports about reshoots and delaying the film after negative test screenings, and I think this is an example of where delaying the film helped it. Rogue One had reshoots, and even people who don't like Disney Star Wars really like that movie. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I liked this movie. One of my main problems with the Falcon series was they wanted to be very cocky and arrogant. But here, he isn't arrogant or cocky. He's actually likable. And his issue in this movie is how he's going to lead a new Avengers team and dealing with the weight and burden of that. And it's done really well. The action sequences in this movie really stand out. If you're a fan of some of the more street-level, grounded MCU projects like Daredevil or the Hawkeye series, it's very much aligned with that. Much like the Russo brothers' Captain America films, this feels like a political action thriller first, and a comic book movie second. And that's a good thing. At a time where a lot of the MCU is starting to feel very assembly line and micromanaged, this is a movie that still has its own identity. Even if you're not a comic book fan, you can enjoy the film if you're a fan of Mission Impossible, Jack Ryan, those kind of movies. It takes things like MKUltra and puts it in a comic book world. It doesn't even really start to feel like a comic book movie until the last 15 or 20 minutes. The plot is pretty intriguing. Harrison Ford is a stand-up performance, and I do kind of joke that this is in essence sort of sequel to Air Force One. Giancarlo Esposito is great villain in this. The film is a bit of a darker tone than some of the other MCU projects. I'd say this is the darkest Captain America movie yet, but it's not the level of dark that was Doctor Strange 2, Agatha, or Werewolf by Night. It still has enough lightheartedness that stops it from feeling nihilistic. Yeah, the original title for the movie was New World Order, but they changed it to Brave New World because apparently the New World Order title made people uncomfortable, and I just asked why. New World Order would have been a better title, because it's referring to the planet of the villains. Now, what does hold it back is it does unfortunately require a lot of homework. You need to have seen the 2008 Hulk movie, all the other Captain America movies, Infinity War, Endgame, and even The Eternals. Other than it feeling a bit too weighted by previous projects, it's still a fantastic film. Number 17, Good Boy. One of the most striking creative choices in Good Boy is its use of perspective. Nearly the entire film is shot from the point of view of the dog, which creates an eerie intimacy and keeps the audience locked into its experience. We rarely see human faces, including that of the main character, which helps the film avoid traditional emotional anchors, and instead forces us to rely on sound, movement, and framing to understand what's happening. It's unsettling, disorienting, and incredibly effective for building tension. The film thrives as a piece of psychological horror. Much of the suspense comes not from loud scares or overt gore, but from the constant sense of uncertainty about whether the dog will survive. Every creak of the floor, every shadow across the doorway feels like a potential threat, and then anxiety lingers throughout. This is a masterclass in how to make a movie with minimal dialogue. The filmmakers trust the audience to piece together the story through visuals and atmosphere, and for the most part it works. That said, the film does ask for a lot of suspension of disbelief. The dog's owner is clearly in no condition to live alone. He suffers from multiple medical issues, is constantly in and out of the emergency room, relies on a pacemaker, and is consistently shown to be a danger to himself. Yet his only lifeline seems to be his sister, who only checks on him with the occasional phone call and nothing more. In reality, the setup is implausible, but it exists so the events of the movie can unfold. You just have to accept the premise and move on. Where the film stumbles most is the world building. We're never given a clear picture of what's haunting the house. Were the threats demonic? Was it that every resident of the place died? There are hints scattered throughout, but not enough context or mythology to make the story feel fully fleshed out. I don't think the film needs to spell out every answer. Limiting things open to interpretation can make horror more effective, but a little more backstory would have added depth. As it stands, some sections feel rushed and underdeveloped. That rushed feeling is compounded by the runtime. At only 72 minutes, Good Boy barely qualifies as a theatrical feature. On one hand, the brisk pace keeps things tight and avoids unnecessary filler. On the other hand, when you weigh cost versus benefit, it doesn't quite feel with the price of a ticket. This is the kind of film that's better suited for streaming, where its originality and artistry can be appreciated without pressure of a full-price theater visit. Still, credit where it's due, this is a remarkably well-directed and original film, especially considering the very small budget. The risks it takes with camera work, perspective, and narrative minimalism are bold, and while not everything lands perfectly, there's enough here to make Good Boy a unique entry in modern indie horror. Number 16, DreamWorks Dog Man. Now, just so you have my point of reference, I went into this movie not really knowing anything about the world of Dog Man, other than the books were written by the same author as Captain Underpants. The first book came out after I had already graduated high school, and the only reason I know these books exist at all is because I had younger siblings who, at the time, were the target age group for the books, but I never read them. So I don't know how faithful an adaptation of the movie is, but as someone who saw it just as the basis of it as a movie, I really enjoyed it. The animation is very unique for a DreamWorks film, looking like book illustrations come to life, mixed with the comic book static of the Spider-Verse and the Batman 60 TV show. With a lot of fourth wall-breaking, self-referential humor and sharp writing. And for a movie about whose character is half dog and half man, it's a surprisingly heartfelt movie, with a sweet message about found family and overcoming generational trauma. The villain is less of a traditional villain, and more of a Dr. Doofenshmirtz type, where he's not really that evil. He just enjoys causing mayhem and doesn't mind being stalked by a silent animal nemesis. His motivation is very similar to Dr. Evil and the Austin Powers movies, where he makes a mini-clone of himself to be his son. From there, it becomes the story about found family that's very heartfelt. It's a fantastic movie that both kids and adults will enjoy. There are a couple of criticisms I have of the film. Mainly, the first 20 minutes move a bit too quickly. There are a few real-world references that feel a bit out of place, since the world of the film has business names that are very generic and are meant to set the film in its own world and give it its own identity. And the other issue I have is The main character is a dog who can't speak, but yet the villain and his son, who are both cats, can speak English, and they don't give an in-universe explanation for this. Little nitpicks, but overall this is a fantastic film for all ages. Number 15, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. While I ultimately gave Dead Reckoning a positive review, I had significant reservations about its central threat, an all-powerful artificial intelligence. Unfortunately, this sequel doubles down on that concept, and not in a good way. The AI antagonist, already a stretch in the previous installment, now feels even more disconnected from the grounded espionage-heavy roots of the franchise. The idea of an omniscient, manipulative algorithm steering world events feels less like Mission Impossible, and more like a rejected script from Black Mirror. There is even a scene where Ethan Hunt communicates directly with the AI, and it plays out like something from a mid-budget sci-fi movie, rather than the globetrotting spy thrillers you've come to love. The film also suffers structurally. It leans heavily on flashbacks, at times resembling a glorified clip show. Hey, remember this villain from 5 movies ago? Remember that thing you did in Ghost Protocol? While some of this nostalgia works in moderation, the frequency of these callbacks start to feel filler rather than meaningful reflection. It's as if the movie is trying to emotionally cash in on the legacy rather than build something fresh. Pacing is another issue. This film is essentially one half of a sprawling 6-hour story split into 2 parts, and it shows. It drags in places. It could have benefited from a tighter, more focused narrative. A crisp 2-hour finale with a clear arc might have packed a more emotional and narrative punch. As it stands, this extended goodbye to Ethan Hunt and his team feels drawn out, and while it does attempt to land some emotional moments, they don't always hit as hard as intended. That said, when it comes to action and stunts, this film delivers. The set pieces are once again jaw-dropping, a testament to the franchise's legacy of practical effects and high-octane choreography. Even when the plot falters, the visceral threat of watching Tom Cruise defy death is worth the price of admission. In the end, this is a flawed but still entertaining farewell to Ethan Hunt. It may not stick landing story-wise, but it reminds us of why we fell in love with the franchise in the first place. Sheer relentless spectacle. Number 14, Elio. This film had a long and somewhat bumpy road to release. When the trailer dropped 2 years ago, it generated curiosity, but also some concern due to its vague tone and unusual premise. Then came the delays, reworks, and reports of lukewarm test screenings, plus the impact of the 2023 writers and actor strikes. All signs pointed to a potential misfire. Thankfully, Elio was not the Frankenstein patchwork many feared it would be. Instead, it's a sweet, vibrant, and emotionally resonant adventure that manages to hold on to that distinct Pixar magic, even if it isn't quite top tier. At its core, Elio is classic Pixar, a heartfelt coming-of-age story wrapped in a wildly imaginative sci-fi package. The premise is instantly engaging. An introverted boy accidentally becomes Earth representative to a diverse council of aliens who believe he's some kind of intergalactic hero. While the story structure treads familiar ground, particularly evoking films like Galaxy Quest, with the whole mistaken identity leads to real heroism angle, it puts you enough of the expend the formula to stand on its own. Visually, the film is a treat. The alien designs are bursting with creativity, each species feeling distinct in both appearance and culture. Pixar smartly embraces the limitless possibilities of our space setting, using it as a backdrop for both spectacle and sincere character moments. The animation is stunning throughout, with some particularly striking sequences when Elio confronts his fears or interacts with the Galactic Council. Thematically, the film deals with identity, loneliness, and the desire to belong, all filtered through the lens of a young boy who feels out of place both at home and among the stars. Elio himself is a relatable protagonist, awkward, sensitive, and unexpectedly courageous. His emotional journey is one of the strongest aspects of the film, and his relationship with his mother, an earnest and determined government worker voice of warmth, is grounded and touching. That said, Elio isn't without flaws. The third act leans heavily into familiar story beats like the light revealed trope and the classic buddy separation before reunion moment. These plot points feel a bit by the numbers and slightly undercut the originality of the film's premise. The villain, while entertaining and quirky mix of menace and humor, isn't given enough backstory and development to leave a lasting impact. He functions more as a narrative obstacle rather than a fully fleshed out antagonist. Despite these issues, Elio still shines where it counts. It's emotionally honest, consistently charming, and peppered with that signature Pixar wit. It may not reach the emotional heights of Inside Out or Up, or the narrative precision of Incredibles, but it stands comfortably alongside mid-tier Pixar entries like Monsters, University, and Finding Dory, films that may not revolutionize the genre, but offer a memorable and worthwhile experience. While not without some structural hiccups, Elio is a heartfelt and imaginative space odyssey anchored by strong character work, dazzling visuals, and classic Pixar emotion. It's a reminder that even in the stars, we're all just trying to figure out who we are and where we belong. Number 13, Predator, Killer of Killers. This is where the Predator franchise really starts to get fun again, largely because it finally allows filmmakers to play in different historical sandboxes. By framing the movie as an anthology, Following a World War II pilot, a Viking warrior, and an ninja in feudal Japan, the film injects fresh energy into a series that desperately needed it. Each segment brings its own tone, visual identity, and cultural flavor, and that variety does a lot of heavy lifting. It expands the predator mythos in a way that feels organic rather than forced, showing how the species is hunted across time and civilizations. Individually, the stories are engaging and often genuinely exciting. The action is creative, the settings are inspired, and the concept of humanity's greatest warriors unknowingly facing the same cosmic threat is a strong foundation for world building. You can feel the filmmakers having fun, and that enthusiasm translates to the screen. However, the film stumbles when it tries to tie everything together. The third act feels oddly shoehorned in, as if the movie suddenly remembers it needs a single unified conclusion. Instead of elevating the anthology format, it ends up repeating the familiar beats of the original Predator film, making the finale feel more recycled than revelatory. While still entertaining overall, the ending undercuts what could have been a truly standout entry by playing things far too safe, but it should have leaned fully into its bold premise. Number 12, Jurassic World Rebirth. This is what the movie Dominion should have been. This is a true return to form. What Rebirth brings back finally is terror. Not just big dinosaur spectacle, but real, suspenseful, edge-of-your-seat tension. This is a scary movie. I legitimately jumped several times, and there were moments where I was literally leaning forward, eyes wide, holding my breath. It's the first Jurassic Park film since the 1993 original that truly captures that primal fear of being hunted by creatures beyond your control. Stylistically, the movie shifts in a bold new direction. While the last few entries return to be Planet of the Apes with dinosaurs, Rebirth clearly takes its cues from Jaws. And that makes perfect sense, given that director Gareth Edwards, who did the 2014 Godzilla reboot, helps this one. That Godzilla movie was famously inspired by Jaws, and you can absolutely feel that same DNA here. Much of Rebirth is set on a boat surrounded by dino-infested waters, and the close quarters tension is thick. It's not about flashy CGI or non-stop action. It's about suspense, dread, and the slow burn of danger creeping closer. What surprised me even more was how well the movie balanced its tension with humor. There are genuinely funny moments here, but none of them undercut the fear. The jokes land, and never at the expense of the stakes. It's a tricky tonal balance, and Edwards absolutely nails it. That being said, the movie isn't perfect. The plot swings between bold new ideas and recycled nostalgia. Some sequences and character moments are near replicas of the original Jurassic Park, down to the camera angles and dialogue beats. There's even a character who feels like a budget version of Ian Malcolm, the sort of diet soda Jeff Goldblum that doesn't quite hit the mark. The film also suffers from character bloat. There are simply too many people on screen, and not all of them serve a clear purpose. You can feel the nearly 3-hour runtime, and I think a tighter, leaner cut would have elevated it even more. Still, despite its flaws, Jurassic World Rebirth is exactly the kind of summer blockbuster experience I want. It's thrilling, tense, funny, scary, and a breath of fresh air for a franchise that is beginning to feel extinct. Gareth Edwards brings a much-needed sense of danger and awe back to the dinosaurs, and for the first time in a long time, I'm excited about where the series is headed. Number 11, Five Nights at Freddy's 2. It was pretty mixed on the first film. I didn't find it scary enough, and to me, it didn't really feel like Five Nights at Freddy's. It felt like a tamer Nightmare on Elm Street. This one was actually scary. This one actually had the tense feeling you get when you play a Five Nights at Freddy's game. The pacing overall is better, there's a fair bit of dark humor, the animatronics actually feel like a threat, and there's quite a bit of creepy imagery. The character of the marionette is especially nightmarish and provides the best scares in the film. The last 20 minutes in particular are heart-poundingly exciting. However, on a plot level, there are still a few issues. For one, it feels like a lot of the new characters are just there to be, for lack of a better term, cannon fodder for the killer animatronics. There's a plotline about a group of paranormal investigators that doesn't really go anywhere. Wayne Knight's character feels like he's just there, and it's frustrating because there are a few times where they try to make you believe he knows more than he's letting on, and you think there's going to be this big reveal, but nope, he's completely useless. There's also a few leaps in logic. Part of the movie centers on a convention about the Fazbear franchise, and that begs the question of why this exists. The murders of the children were national news, so why is there a convention where people dress up like the characters? That seems a bit disrespectful. I think it's supposed to be a meta-commentary on the fandom, like the Scream movies, but I don't know, I don't think it worked. Also, I didn't really buy Josh Hutcherson and Elizabeth Leo's relationship in this one. It worked better in the first one, and here it kind of feels forced, especially because Leo is the main focus of this one. Overall, though, I was far more entertained than the previous entry. If you're not a fan of the games, you probably won't like it as much, but if you are a fan, I'm happy to say this is fan service at its best. And here we go, the top 10 movies of 2025. What I'm going to do... couple of days ago, I put out my list of the top 10 worst movies of 2025, so now it's time to look at the other side of the coin and honor the top 10 best. Again, this is my opinion. There's a movie on here that you did not like, or there's a movie on here that was not included. Feel free to share yours in the comments, and please respect my opinion. Never mind, let's get started. Number 10, Superman. Much like the MCU Spider-Man films, the main character has already been a hero for a while. They know we've seen Superman's origin story over and over, and we're tired of it, so they just skip straight to the action. This is a world that feels very lived in. The people in this world are used to big cities being attacked on a regular basis. The action here is, in the best way, very comic booky, feeling like a live-action cartoon without going too far with it. There are a few moments that go too far with the silliness and humor, however, and the way the plot flows also feels very episodic. The Snyder Cut of Justice League was divided into 6 parts, with each part lasting around 30 to 45 minutes. This film has a lot of fade-to-black moments before going to the next plotline, and it feels like episodes of an HBO Max series edited as a movie. Also, the CGI can look a bit off at times, particularly when Superman is flying. The new version of Lex is fantastic. The other versions of Lex were a bit too camp, and his greatest plan was a real estate scam. This version feels like a legitimate threat, and though he can be a bit over the top at times, he's still a very hateable villain. Supes and Lois have great chemistry together, and of course the character that steals the show is Superman's dog, Krypto. This film is great at being fresh for today's audience, while also paying tribute to what came before. It can be a bit narratively all over the place, but it's still a triumph. Number 9, Thunderbolts. This is one of the most humid MCU films to date. While the franchise has long relied on quippy humor, sometimes to its detriment, Thunderbolts wisely dials it back. The humor that is present lands well and feels organic, never undercutting the emotional weight of the scenes. The cast absolutely sells it. Everyone has solid chemistry, and their performances add depth to characters that have often been sidelined or underserved in other MCU projects. The action is visceral and tightly choreographed, keeping things street level and gritty for much of the runtime. That grounded quality is part of what makes the first 2 acts so compelling. Unfortunately, that focus and restraint don't carry through to the 3rd act. The film takes a hard turn into overblown spectacle, introducing a villain who feels wildly out of place. It would be like putting Thanos into the final episode of Daredevil. The total whiplash is jarring. The first 2 thirds of the movie are small scale and personal, and suddenly it's world-ending stakes with a dark Superman figure who's neither fresh nor compelling. It's a trope that has been run into the ground by now, and here it feels lazy rather than meaningful. It's a shame, because the rest of the movie is so strong. This mismatch between setup and payoff echoes a pattern we've seen in some of Marvel's Disney Plus shows. Solid build-up, followed by a finale that buckles under the weight of too much plot too fast. And honestly, Thunderbolts might have worked better as a Disney Plus series, whereas characters and conflicts could breathe more and build naturally toward the climax that matches the current tone. Despite its 3rd act missteps, Thunderbolts is still a standout in the modern MCU landscape. It's mature, emotional, and refreshingly light on jokes. If not for the disappointing villain, this could have ranked among the MCU's very best. Number 8, Drop. Who would have thought you could make memes creepy? Drop is a highly original thriller that has excitement, mystery, a good message, and just a bit of humor sprinkled in for good measure. The main character is a woman who has gotten out of an abusive relationship, but still has trauma. The film has a commentary on abuse victims and overcoming abusive trauma. Despite its serious themes, the film also manages to sprinkle some light humor in on occasion to ease the tension. Characters like the main character's waiter provide some awkwardly funny dialogue. Because the film is a chamber piece, which is a film where the characters are in one location, the film is high tension and high stakes. The film's pacing never falters, and actually manages to get more exciting as it goes on. This, to me, felt like an Agatha Christie story set in modern day, and the film is scary because it's realistic. With almost everyone's addiction to social media and our phones, the film is plausible, and you feel like it could happen to you, which is why it's effective. That being said, at times the film does require you to suspend your disbelief, as there are a couple of plot conveniences and contrivances that exist to move the plot forward. But the main character is fantastically written. She's a woman who's willing to do anything to protect her kids and go full mama bear. It's an empowering movie. And I hope the movie inspires people who are in similar situations to finally speak out and get out. If this film can save just one life, it's worth it. This is a tight, well-paced, exciting thriller mystery. It's definitely worth checking out. Number 7, The Gorge. Apple TV has released a couple of their movies in theaters for limited runs. Spirited, Argyle, Fly Me to the Moon, and it's a shame that this is the one that went straight to streaming, because out of all the movies they've released, this one justifies going to theaters. The aesthetic and tone of it feel very much like the Maze Runner movies, but the premise is still original. And there's a reason that they released this movie on Valentine's Day. Yes, partly because it is a love story, but there's also a very specific reason involving one of the characters that ties to that date, but I won't spoil it. After the first 20 minutes of exposition, there's actually very little dialogue in the movie until about the last third. And this works well, because the film makes the two main leads build a relationship with each other without talking to each other. Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy have great chemistry. The film has intense action sequences, some edge-of-your-seat horror elements, a well-written, fleshed-out romance. Everyone can find something to enjoy about this movie. And if you don't have Apple TV, consider this film your excuse to get a free trial just to watch this movie. It's definitely worth checking out. Number 6, Looney Tunes, The Day the Earth Blew Up. The animation in this movie shows why Warner Brothers is one of the top animation studios. It's fluid and gorgeous. The visual gags and slapstick humor you expect from Looney Tunes are all here in this film. There are a few clever fourth wall breaks, one of which I think was one of the best jokes in the movie, and for the most part feels like classic Looney Tunes. Key phrase here being, for the most part. There are, unfortunately, a couple of times in the first act where it feels like the humor is trying too hard to appeal to Gen Z by being trendy, and it took me out of the film, because it no longer feels like the world of Looney Tunes in those scenes. Fortunately, those types of jokes are only in the first act, and they go by pretty quickly. The film is a fun buddy comedy, teaming up Porky Pig and Daffy Duck, who work well off each other with their dialogue and humor. The plot feels straight out of a cheesy 1950s sci-fi movie, mixed with a Futurama episode, with references to classic sci-fi such as Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The film has relatively good pacing, and a clever third act twist as well as payoff during Chekhov's gun. This is one of the best animated films of the year. Go see it, support 2D animation, it's great for kids and adults. Number 5, Night of the Zoopocalypse. This is one of the most creative animated films I've seen in a while. This film is a collaboration between Canada, France, and Belgium, and last year the country of Belgium won an Academy Award for Best Animated Film for the movie Flow. This film is basically, what if H.P. Lovecraft was kid-friendly? The film is sort of a mix of the Penguins of Madagascar TV show, Wallace and Gromit the Curse of the Were-Rabbit, and Five Nights at Freddy's. The way the zombie virus starts and is transmitted is wildly creative and different. I won't spoil how, but it's definitely done in a way that I've never seen before, and definitely not something you'd ever expect. Much like Monsters vs. Aliens, this is a kid-friendly throwback to the B-horror films of the 50s. The film is also pretty sophisticated. There's no trendy pop culture references, no misplaced pop songs, no innuendo, no profanity. The film is extremely, pleasantly family-friendly, though some kids may of course be a bit scared by the infected zoo animals. They did their best to make them look cute, but some sensitive kids might be upset. This was a fantastic film, kids and adults will enjoy it, and it's great for families. Number 4, The Legend of Ochi. This is a family film released by A24, something I never thought I'd say. And I hope the movie does well, because A24 needs to make more family movies, especially when they're this well done. This movie feels very much aligned with the family films of the 80s, specifically E.T., The Dark Crystal, and Labyrinth. If I hadn't seen Willem Dafoe and Finn Wolfhard in other movies, and you told me that this was some obscure movie from the 1980s that somehow got lost and then just recently found, I totally believe you. It's not 80s throwback in the sense that it has 80s references everywhere, or by the fact that it has Finn Wolfhard, because it actually feels like its own world, not tied to a specific time period, but at the same time, there's no modern technology. And I gotta praise the practical effects of the movie. These are Jim Henson level impressive. The creature in this movie is sort of a mix of E.T., Grogu, and a Mogwai. He's adorable and funny. There's some good world building and lore around the creatures in the movie. Now, plot-wise, it does borrow very heavily from How to Train Your Dragon and E.T., but at the same time, it has enough of its own identity. I only have 2 real criticisms with the film. One, there is unfortunately some mild swearing that was unneeded, because the rest of the movie is really cute and sweet. And 2, as good as Willem Dafoe is, I don't know what was up with the accent he chose to do with this movie. Half the time, I couldn't understand what he was saying. I was surprised to see that the Russo brothers were executive producers on this. After the disaster that was the Electric State, this almost seems like an apology, because you can tell the people behind this really put a lot of thought, effort, heart, and passion into this. I wouldn't say this is a movie for super little kids, not because of any content concerns, simply because it probably won't hold their attention. I'd say the 10 and up crowd is perfect for this movie, and for someone who grew up with films like E.T., you'll probably enjoy it too. Number 3, Fantastic Four First Steps. Not only does it finally get the tone and character right, but refreshingly, it's an MCU project that does not require homework. And it's a reboot that doesn't retell the origin story again. It explains the origin, but it doesn't spend half the movie on it. It's more akin to the intro of the CW Arrowverse shows. And this film is set on alternate Earth, not the main MCU Earth, so it's not tied down to the other MCU projects and is given more free reign. Director Matt Shakman directed the WandaVision series, and this movie very much feels like the early episodes of that show that were pastiches of the 50s and 60s. The first 2 Fantastic Four movies were live-action cartoons in a bad way, but this is a live-action cartoon in the best way, mixed with old 50s and 60s sci-fi serials. It's one part The Jetsons, one part Lost in Space, and one part Flash Gordon. It knows it's campy and embraces it, while at the same time not going too far with it. And it's refreshing to see a superhero film where the heroes were revered, not feared. There's been a lot of nihilistic comic book properties where the heroes are feared and the government seeks to control and regulate them, but much like the Adam West Batman show, the authorities are cool with the heroes. Michael Giacchino does the score here, and his score is very reminiscent of his work on The Incredibles, the J.J. Abrams Star Trek films, and Tomorrowland. Unlike the previous iterations of Fantastic Four, where the chemistry between the actors fell flat, these actors actually feel like a real family and work well with each other, with gentle loving ribbing and being willing to do anything for each other. This is one of the most human, emotional films as of late. My only real criticism is the pacing can drag in certain parts. Compared to the majority of the MCU, there's not as much action. There are scenes that I feel are over-explained and go on for a bit too long, so maybe the pacing could have been tightened a bit, but that's a nitpick. The film is still nothing short of fantastic. Our runner-up is Predator Badlands. This is a unique entry into the franchise, because not only is it the first standalone Predator movie to be PG-13, it's also the first standalone Predator movie that does not take place on Earth. As much as I like the other Predator movies, they all kind of feel the same. Same story beat, same third act. This one completely throws that out the window and twists the franchise in a new direction. A direction that I thought worked, but I can tell is going to be very divisive for longtime fans of the franchise. I know a lot of people are going to be turned away by the Predator being the protagonist of the movie, because when you think Predator, you think ruthless hunter that you root against, and here they make him a more sympathetic, emotional character. Again, I thought it worked, but I completely understand if that irks somebody. The main non-alien character played by Elle Fanning is a delightful character. She's like Ripley from the Alien movies if Ripley had a sense of humor. She's infectiously optimistic, while the Predator is pessimistic. And it works well, and provides some well-done humor. The humor in the movie is well-timed and works, as opposed to the 2018 Predator movie, where the humor was forced and lowbrow. However, I thought the setup, as fresh to the franchise as it wasn't totally original either. Of course, the main character is a misfit outcast needing to prove himself. Of course, there's a MacGuffin that he needs to find to restore his honor. And of course, there's an enemies to friends arc. It's familiar, but it also works. Now, does the controversial PG-13 rating hurt the movie? I didn't think so. I didn't watch this movie and think, I wish this movie were more violent and brutal. In fact, I think compared to a lot of other PG-13 movies, this is pretty tame. I've talked many times about how I found Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness too violent, specifically the scene where Wanda murders a bunch of superheroes in excessively graphically violent ways, and how it really put me off the movie. This has just the right amount. The blood in the movie is alien blood. I'd say the violence level is about the same as Alita Battle Angel or The Mandalorian. It's a movie very much aimed at the teenage crowd, but I think it's also accessible enough for longtime fans of the franchise who look past the PG-13 rating and give it a chance. There's only one curse word in the entire movie, and it's a tame one, which again, is more than I can say for a lot of comic book movies over the last 10 years, even the PG-13 ones. The action is well done, the story feels fresh to the world of these movies, and the character is well written. I'd recommend watching the first Predator movie and the first 2 Alien movies. They're not required viewing, but you'll definitely get more out of this when certain callbacks happen. They're quick enough that you won't be confused if this is your first movie in this universe, but you'll get a grin on your face if you do understand. And the number 1 movie of 2025 is Sketch. This completely caught me off guard in the best way possible. When you hear Angel Studios, you might immediately think of overly faith-based or religious films, and for good reason. That's largely been their reputation up until now. But Sketch is different. While it's certainly family-friendly, it's not heavy-handed with the religious messaging. In fact, it doesn't really lean into any specific religious themes at all. Instead, it's a wildly accessible, emotionally rich, and creatively daring film that just about anyone can enjoy. What surprised me most was the tone. This is technically a family movie, but it's got a real edge to it. The Kind of mentioned finding Goosebumps or classic 80s kids films. You know, the kind of movies Steven Spielberg used to make. Ones that weren't afraid to push the emotional boundaries of the other audience. Sketch taps into that exact energy. It has moments that are genuinely intense, even a little creepy, but it always knows its limits. It walks the fine line of being scary enough to thrill without being traumatizing. Think of it like the Babadook if it were PG, and blended with the quirky horror of a Doctor Who episode, specifically the one with the girl whose drugs come to life. That's basically Sketch. And speaking of drugs, the visual effects are incredibly well done. The way the hand-drawn creatures integrate with the live-action footage is seamless and imaginative. Some of the drugs feel like twisted, evil versions of Pokemon, equal parts fascinating and unsettling. It's a brilliant creative concept brought to life with care and flair. Performance-wise, the film delivers across the board. Tony Hale is excellent, bringing the kind of grounded emotional weight that really anchors the story. But the real revelation is the cast of child actors, who give some of the most believable and heartfelt performances I've seen this year. Like a true Spielbergian adventure, the film's emotional core is deeply tied to themes of grief, loss, and healing. These heavier elements are handled with sensitivity and nuance, never feeling out of place even amid the fantastical premise. But Sketch isn't all darkness and tension. It's also funny, warm, and heartfelt. There's real humor here, some of it whimsical, some of it character-driven, and at its heart, it's a story about connection, creativity, and resilience. It's one of those rare movies that successfully juggles scares, laughs, and emotional depth without compromising any of them. In a year that was full of sequels, reboots, and formulaic blockbusters, Sketch stands out as something truly original. It's bold, it's imaginative, it's emotionally resonant, and most of all, it's fun. I honestly can't recommend it highly enough, and it's my favorite movie of the year 2025. Should share your ranking of the top 10 movies of 2025, and I'll see you next time.